Okay, let's try this again. I have redone our notes on Placemark, and the goal here was to create a document that feels cohesive, thorough, but more importantly, actionable. So what I've done is I've broken down all of my previous feedback into three themes: look and feel, interaction design, layout, and hierarchy. And each of those sections has some actionable recommendations. In the case of look and feel, I have some optional things to play with. But for interaction design, I have some recommendations. Layout and hierarchy, some recommendations. And then below that, everything else. So again, I spent a long time just clicking around, exploring, playing, and finding the edges of the product. And I came across a handful of bugs. Each of these has a repro path so that you can do this on your own, whereas before we didn't have these. Added some notes to my nits, like why are they nits? For accessibility, I pointed to a couple more specific places. And then for visuals, just found some, I guess, kind of bugs, but like incorrect colors in different places, or how we can improve some grouping of different elements. Found some issues with dark mode, talked a little bit about the feeling of being dangerous. You have a danger zone and destructive actions. Consistency with things like tooltips and bringing like visual signifiers to common elements like keyboard shortcut indicators. And then at the very end, just some miscellaneous stuff that doesn't really fit into any of these. For example, like why does Scratchpad exist versus the concept of like a draft map? They feel very similar, but you're creating two separate, distinct kinds of flows for users that don't feel compatible. So maybe that's an opportunity to rethink. Anyways, just a few of these. And I hope this is useful. I think this is like the primary artifact. But as mentioned, we can also go over to Figma. Should have had that zoomed out there for a sec. And what I've done is I've gone through and you can see a bunch of comments. So I've screenshotted the interface, added a bunch of comments. I'll make sure all of these comments feel clear, but there shouldn't be anything commented that isn't already here. So what I hope is that these are sort of companion artifacts. Now, as far as the redesign itself, again, just from a time consideration, this got really gnarly really quick. You have a lot of different screens we could have spent time on. Redrawing icons would be really hard, but icons are really an important part of the way that your interface feels. So barring that, I have drawn gray circles. I earlier was using these feather icons just as placeholder, but even these don't feel like the right fit for your product. And so rather than sort of tunnel visioning in on those icons, let's abstract them away and look a little bit more broadly at placement and selection state. So with the time I had, I focused on the map editor view, and there's basically one really important thing that I wanted to fix, which was the layout, the hierarchy of this page, where it's really clear what is affecting what is a parent of what, and what is a sibling of what, because in today's interface, this is not clear. Just as an example, this menu is for our current editor, but this profile photo is for the global account. I have the ability to log out or switch organizations. So these two things apply at different scopes, but they're placed in the same bounding box as the app or the map toolbar. Now, importantly, this sidebar, this is the one in the Notion, I point out that there's one rectangle that needs to move to fix this whole problem, and that's this rectangle, this whole properties panel sidebar. And the problem is that it extends full height instead of being capped to the the bottom of this toolbar. A really good just sort of gut check on this is Figma, right? Imagine if this properties panel extended all the way to the top of this window, it'd feel out of place because the properties panel only affects the contents of this Figma canvas, not anything above it. Now, what that also means doing is killing this visual tab or moving this somewhere else, presumably over into the menu, because what's behind the visual tab is settings for this map, the way we want it to look, and some symbolization, which I don't know what that is. Anyways, we're going to move that over to menu, and we're going to bring this sidebar height down so that it aligns at the bottom of the toolbar. And we'll just add a little bit of contrast between sort of our editor menu and then in the top right global controls and then our editor toolbar. So the very abbreviated walkthrough of this, again, you'll have access to the Figma file for as long as you want, is we'll look over here. Now, I've done several things, right? But given the time, I had to stop at some point. So we're not trying to fundamentally change the product. We're not trying to redo entire workflows. What we're trying to do is take the thing that you already have and with a few small visual tweaks, improve the hierarchy, make this view easier to scan, a little bit more understandable. So you'll notice right away maybe 3 or 4 important changes. The first is that we now have bounding boxes around sort of each layer in the hierarchy is grouped together in a bar. So we have sort of our global app Chrome, which is my profile, feedback, maybe a quick shortcut to view the cheat sheet. We have the title of our document, the organization that it's in, and then our menu to save, export, change the theme, that kind of thing. Below that is our editor toolbar that contains our persistent actions with a brighter active state so that it's easier to just at a glance understand what mode I'm in. If I'm going to click, what will it do? I should be able to scan that right away. Whereas in the previous version, this was getting lost. We have our dynamic actions in the middle. And then these are also persistent actions, but they're all secondary. What I'm envisioning in my head is search would go over there, but also undo and redo. So you have these currently in the menu, undo and redo. But again, these are in a weird position because you've placed them alongside sort of global app level interactions like opening or exporting. So let's move undo and redo down along the toolbar of controls that are editing just this map. So I think those would go over here in some way. And then the other thing that I did, you can see I've added a little bit more visual clarity to which tab is selected in the properties panel. Here's the before. And, you can tell it's black and like a lighter gray, but I think you can use both the black and lighter gray as well as just like this actual shape of a tab to make it really clear where I am. So I'm never having to like fumble or guess, especially with this sort of close contrast. Kill the visual tab. And then the other thing that I wanted to play with was how can we use space more effectively? So we have our table of properties here. I don't know if this is an edge case. This is just the demo data that I received. But we have this internal scrolling, which is a little bit awkward, especially because we have all this extra space. So I just played around with what if we could have each of these sections in the sidebar, at least for this feature subtab, be a collapsible and expandable section that fills the space available, especially since export and viewing that GeoJSON seem like secondary things. I could, expand export and maybe it only goes up to here, right? Again, another good gut check on this is Figma. Like if I open export, it doesn't take over the whole sidebar. It just takes over the space that it needs. So we could do a similar thing here. Added a little bit more visual polish to the table. Having it be inset from the left and the right, it might be useful, but in other areas you have table views like this where you actually have horizontal overflow. So it's really useful to use that horizontal space as effectively as possible. But in the case of this feature table, it's inset from the edges. They're very, very similar. So like, why can't we just align all of these things? So we'll have full width. In the case of the table, it would scroll. Maybe there's a whole better way to do that. I'm not really sure. Zebra stripe with some really subtle shades of gray. So it's easier to scan what a row is. Doing things like killing this all inform view and instead letting this be sort of the inline creation of a new property. And this big old add property button, we might need to change the label, but that button would initiate this form because again, this form can be, lots of properties at once. This whole form control. So that's it. That's what we get for, a couple hours of time. We have the before, we have the after. It is clearly the same app. Hopefully, one of these feels a little bit more clear, a little easier to scan, maybe is a little more intuitive for a user to pick up how to use the product. All right. 10 minutes. We're done. Thanks.